Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible live from Boca Raton, Florida. It's hot, it's smuggy, it's humid, it's sweaty, but we're here in Florida. Different location, same podcast. This is season 5, episode 41, episode 254 overall. The portion of the week is a portion known as Eikev. It's the third portion in the 5th book of the 5 books of Moses, known as Deuteronomy. And it is great to be back with you again for Coaching the Bible as we're closing in on finishing our 5th round of the book. I want to take a moment to thank a couple of people, no names, who this week reached out and told me that they'd been listening, they've been enjoying the podcast. I really appreciate it. A couple of people who told me that they enjoyed the 252, which is the elegy around the fast of the 9th of Av from a few weeks ago. I appreciate that too. And also, separately from that, I want to shout out to my wife as we are celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary this week, albeit actually spending the day itself apart, which is pretty sad. But okay, it's part of the deal. What can you do? Here in Boca Raton, I also want to wish a healthy and speedy recovery to my mother, who underwent the surgery this week, knee replacement surgery. Thank God she's doing great so far. She's not doing cartwheels just yet. But hey, who knows before I go back home? Maybe that's going to be the case. Okay, so let's dive into this week's topic. We're going to call it Leadership in Prosperity, how to lead when you're winning, how to lead when you're winning. A lot of what we talked about in Coaching the Bible so far, in many cases, is where there's deficiency, where the leader's at a lack or at a loss or is missing something, has to strive and struggle and to work to build up to get to a space where success actually happens, right? And that's a lot of it. And that struggle is really important. That struggle is very fundamental to success. There's no question about it. At the same time, there's an aspect of this which is really crucial, which is, what about when you're winning? How do you lead from the front? How do you lead when you're out ahead? What do you do in those situations? And then related to that, and I want to really discuss both today, is what about when you're winning and you don't even realize that you're winning? That's probably worse. But that does happen occasionally. You don't even realize that you're ahead of the pack. You don't even realize that you're actually crushing your goals. And how does that happen? So we want to talk about winning. Specifically, how do you lead in the space of prosperity? How do you lead when you're winning? Okay. And so the reality of it is, from the Bible, is that Moses actually talks about this in this week's portion. In the wilderness, for the most part, over the many years, at least what we see in the Bible, is that leadership meant crisis management. They needed food. They had to bring food. The manna fell from the sky every day. They needed to travel. They needed to stay still. Okay, we have the clouds by day, fire by night, told us when to move. And they basically appreciated and understood that they were operating in crisis urgency mode, at least certainly at the beginning part of it and at the end part. The beginning part in the Exodus, the end part when they're now moving closer and closer and edging closer and closer to entering the land. All those are crisis urgency, war type situations. And the leadership moment in those spaces is very much a crisis oriented type. In the middle of those 38 years, we don't know much about what went on in those 38 years. It moved around a little bit, but it wasn't the same sort of crisis mode. It's a very different operating mode that's going on day to day, week, month to month during that period. So it's important to understand that space. And now, as they are standing at the edge of going into the land, they need to have a different conversation. And while it's true that they're going to go into the land and they're going to have to battle and fight wars until they're actually able to settle the land, they're actually coming into the land from a place of incredible strength and momentum. And there's fear on the sides, at least some of the enemy that's in front of them. And so they're coming in from a space of winning, of being in a situation going in as well of prosperity. They won the wars on the east bank of the Jordan River, in the land that is now modern day Jordan, where the 2.5 tribes settled. They took over towns and infrastructure that they didn't build. And they're going to come into the land, and the same thing's going to happen. They're going to find cities and homes and villages and fields and vineyards and orchards and all this stuff that they didn't actually build. And they're going to take them over. Or they're going to settle as well, and they're going to build their own. And so the question now becomes is how do you manage one level, but how do you lead when you're in that space and everything is really, really good and things are going very, very well? What do you do in that situation? And so these two kinds of things emerge. Number one is a leader who knows he's winning. And how do you guard against what we call arrogance, drift, or even simply just comfort, being comfortable about it? That's one. And two, the leader who doesn't even realize that they're winning and they wake up to abundance that they have and that they can now lead from a place of strength. So these are really just like core ideas, different than what we've talked about much of the time. So you leader, I want you to think about the following questions. Think about your space right now. You want to think about your space from a work standpoint. You want to think about it from a home standpoint, whatever domain you want to talk about, and ask yourself the question, am I actually in a winning season, quote unquote, right now? And do I even know that that's true? So am I winning? Yes, no, maybe so. And am I sure that I know that I am winning or that I am not? If I am on the platform of winning at the moment, what am I doing to steward that success forward? It's a really crucial question about it. So, okay, congratulations. I've reached a pedestal, a milestone, whatever the case may be. But what am I doing now to stoke and to continue the momentum of the winning? Question 3 is, could I possibly be underestimating my current position? Meaning I'm winning more than I care to admit or willing to admit or even realize. And therefore I'm leading like I'm still in crisis. I'm leading like I'm still in scarcity. And then the last question is, what might change in my leadership if I fully own the fact that I was currently in a good place? In other words, tactically speaking, to be honest, we don't lead the same when we're climbing than we do when we're on the top. And there is a maturation and there is a process that is unfolding there. We have to think about some of the tactics or tools or structures or strategies that we use in X situation that no longer apply for where we are now in Y situation because we're winning. So let's dive in a little bit to the text and look at these two things. The first one is the case of the leader who knows he or she is winning. The Bible tells us in chapter 8, when you have eaten and you are satisfied, beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. A very, very famous verse, an incredibly powerful and meaningful verse. Moses' warning is simple. Success can make you forget who you are and how you got. Again, success can make you forget who you are and how you got here. If you've ever won anything, if you've ever been successful in anything, you can vouch for Moses' statement that you think you got yourself here, that you think you did it alone, that you think that nobody helped you. You think that there were no teammates, there was no village, there was no support, there was no person who got you started. That leads to a heavy level of pride, even bordering on hubris, probably hubris, excessive pride there. You alone are the cause. It might lead to some level of entitlement, that the assumption that the abundance will always flow because I'm here now, always going to be here. That is incredibly dangerous. Number 3, a different danger is that you might now drift from purpose. Because you have reached the pinnacle, you've reached the top, now you sort of take the foot off of the pedal and you start to drift from the mission. We've seen that happen with sports, certainly this comes up a lot, where someone is a champion and after they've reached the mountaintop, they reach the top, then they start to drift from their main purpose of what got them there. And they start to move into other areas that are not their focus. And then they lose the plot and then they don't have the success any longer. And number 4 is an erosion of discipline. We get lazy. When we get to the spaces of victory, we get to the top, we win the championship. We earn the X amount of money. We sell the company for an amount of money. We've accomplished, whatever it is we want to do in our community. And we let the discipline slide. And when we let the standards slide, then what happens then? So on one side of this coin is this idea that Moses is talking about here in the Bible is when you are winning, know that you're winning. You know that you're winning. These are the dangers that could happen to you. We have to protect against it. Now, the underlying thinking around this is a term I heard many years ago called affluenza. Well, affluenza, I don't believe is actually a psychological term in practice, but it has been applied in many situations. It's the combination of the words affluence and influenza, sort of like a disease that comes from being overly prosperous. So when prosperity effectively is eroding the very values and discipline that actually built that prosperity. And so what ends up happening is that it dulls the urgency, weakens empathy, and tempts leaders to ignore the small cracks that are going on because everything's fine. There was an example I read about actually where a lawyer made a defense for a teenager who I think was committed some sort of crime. I think it was a car accident, some sort of like a vehicular manslaughter, where the defense was affluenza. The fact that the teen could not appreciate by virtue of the fact that he'd grown up wealthy, could not appreciate the feelings or the lives of other people. Anyway, so the portion of the week, Eikev warns us, and Moses warns us that abundance can make us forget the wilderness habits that kept you alive. You need those going forward. You need to have them. They might change a little bit. They might mature. They might, grow a little bit, but you need to have them. So underlying that idea is affluenza, number one. And number two is moral licensing. It's this idea that when we use past wins to justify a shortcut in the present, we might say, well, I've earned this indulgence because of my past victories. I'm at this level already. I have to stay at this level. So I'm going to cut a couple of corners here and there. I've earned that. So Israel could say, we kept the covenant in the wilderness. Now that we enter the land, we can breathe. And so the modern leader will cut corners. They'll neglect some of the governance that needs to apply to their institutions, their businesses, or they might simply let some of the protocols slide because, well, we're already here. And so because we're already here, we don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. And so from a leader's standpoint, there's a few things that have to go into place to be able to really succeed and to stay at that level. You don't want to drop from that level. So number one is to really build gratitude in as a system and not just a feeling. We talked a lot in the past about rituals and habits and putting things into place that keep things where they need to be. And this is a really great check. As you continue to build rituals of success, but not just the success, the appreciation and the gratitude around the success into the structure of the business, into the structure of the family. So then the winning actually doesn't erode because you're talking about it. You're playing it forward. You're appreciating it in every way. I actually saw somewhere else the idea that you should constantly tell your origin story in different ways and in different formats to constantly remind of how you got to where you are. So you shouldn't think that you were always here, but there was a process, and there was a progression, and there was hard work, and it took time to get to the place that you're in. It's a really great way to do it. Number two is to have a very strong and obvious and visible sense of humility, where you're sharing credit generously and regularly. You're naming people directly who helped. You are modeling the teachability and the learnability and the appreciation level of everybody involved. These principles in play help you stay focused and stay on the level of where you are. You'll actually hear some athletes talk about the idea that, one of the drivers was getting the victory for that guy, because that guy's been here many, many years. He's been such a great teammate. He's been around so long, been such a value to the entity, whatever it is, and appreciating that person's impact, that person's role involved. Third thing here is, and this is hard, is to always have what we'll call the stewardship mindset. We talked about the idea that leadership is stewardship, that the idea that it's servant-led leadership is a sort of the model that we want. So we have to appreciate abundance and success and winning as a trust that is given to us to multiply and not to simply just consume. So let's say you have investors. The goal isn't that you were successful 1 year. They invested in you because they believed in you that you would be successful over and over and over and over again. So there's that the mindset that if you are carrying this quote unquote burden, but you're carrying this opportunity of success and abundance forward, not to just have it one time, but to have it. One great example is something I mentioned a lot of times here in the Bible, and I talk about it a lot when I'm with clients one-on-one, is the coach of the San Francisco 49ers from the 80s, Bill Walsh. He continued to obsess over the fundamentals and the culture, even while the team was winning. The idea that that's how they would stay sharp. He wasn't operating in the crisis mode that he did when he started, whole other business. No. Well, even when they were winning, he made sure to sit on the real fundamentals, the real core values, the real strategies, the real standard of performance, so that they could continue to roll the victories one into the next and year into year. So that's side one. That's when you actually know you're winning. Side two, perhaps the more dangerous of the two, perhaps, is the leaders who don't realize it. They don't appreciate that winning is happening to them, around them, for them, with them, by them. That's a different kind of danger. So here's an example, which I don't think we normally think of this way, but think about this way. Earlier in the same chapter, chapter 8, the Bible tells us that Moses tells the people that over the course of time, this is about them having gratitude, but over the course of the time in the desert, their clothing did not wear out and that they lacked nothing. Meaning, it's not like they had a full wardrobe or that they had the ability to go change and buy clothing and go to the store and trade and all that other. It just didn't exist. There was no malls in the Sinai desert as far as I'm aware. And the Bible tells us that they were able to wear the same clothing for the entirety of the period that they were in the desert. It's miraculous. But at the same time, as much as it's miraculous, perhaps you don't appreciate that it's actually happening. And so you forget that you're actually in a winning mode. You forget that you're actually benefiting. You forget that you're actually successful. Moses tells them sometimes the provision is so consistent that you stop noticing it. They've been winning in ways for so long, they just simply forgot to name it, forgot to appreciate it, forgot to simply just sit on it for a minute. So one is the clothing. The second one is the man falling from the sky. It had miracles every day of the week, multiple times on the weekend, and perhaps they didn't even realize. They were unaware. So the unaware leader is in some cases a dangerous leader because the unaware leader is always operating from that scarcity mindset. It's a scarcity reflex, and they're always leading with urgency, pressure, stress, tension, all that other stuff. And there's always a fear of leaner times coming in, which makes it very hard to grow. The second thing that happens with the unaware leader is that there's some sort of a burnout, what I'll call a burnout blindness. When you're always running at a crisis pace, even after the crisis ends, you are blind to what's happening, obviously, but you're also blind to appreciate what's actually going to happen, which is the burnout, because you're burning it on both ends all the time, even after you've reached a certain pinnacle and a certain level of success. That's incredibly dangerous. Number three, for the unaware leader does not appreciate that they're winning, is they're missing opportunities. They're not investing, they're not expanding, they're not taking risks because there's always assuming leanness or that they're actually not as strong, as powerful, as abundant as they actually are. And so they miss opportunities, they miss the investments because they're thinking in the small. And so you get situations that are unfortunate because the leader didn't appreciate it. And it's true. There are leaders who are right for that first stage, getting to winning. There are leaders who are right for the stage of leading when you're actually winning. But it is true for many leaders that they don't appreciate always the wins that they'd actually already attained. The underlying part of that, first, as we mentioned, is the scarcity mindset. We think we can't when actually the conditions and the circumstances allow us to say that we can. It's a survival muscle, and it's understood and just appreciate where it comes from. It comes from having gone through the lean times. It comes from having built it up from scratch. It comes from having had to do everything. And so you stay in that scarcity mindset all the time, even when abundance is in front of you. The second thing that happens is an underlying piece to this idea is something that's called the hedonic adaptation. Something I actually didn't know about before preparing for this week's episode. There's a well-documented psychological pattern where improvements in life or work quickly become the new normal so that the emotional boost fades. Meaning that you go from level to level to level and you don't appreciate the improvements that took place from one level to the next, and you forget that you were level 1 and now you're level 3, let's say. You forget the work that it took to get there. And so it becomes the new normal. So you have no appreciation of the fact that you actually worked to reach a certain level. And therefore it doesn't give you any sort of emotional hit when you get there. And leaders can miss that they've moved from scarcity to stability or from scarcity to success because the brain adjusts to the better condition. So in this week's portion, the manna falling from the sky, the unfailing clothing, the steady water could feel totally normal and ordinary after many decades, but in fact, they were daily miracles. And the third one is this idea called the arrival fallacy, which was coined by somebody who I studied with many, many years ago, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Talvin Shafar. It's the mistaken belief that happiness or fulfillment will come only after reaching the next big goal. I didn't study happiness under him, although I went to a number of lectures of his on happiness. He is one of the foremost thinkers, writers, and teachers on the subject of happiness. And this idea that it's always next, it's always coming, it's always the next one, it's not this one. So a leader might hit a milestone, entering the land, closing a deal, launching a powerful program, but immediately is now shifting the goalpost to the next conquest or the next quarter or the next thing. And the result is you never let yourself feel the winning because you're always chasing the next thing. And over time, if we do that, not just for ourselves, but for the teams, that robs the teams of morale and makes success feel hollow. We don't even have a chance to celebrate what we're doing. So we have to now then move into a space where we can behave differently or prepare ourselves differently so that we can be aware of and appreciative of the wins and success. So there's a couple of what I would call tools, as we've talked about before, rituals, behaviors, things to be done that allow and help a leader to appreciate that he or she is actually already. Number one is what we'll call the gratitude grid. If you just take a piece of paper and you take 3 columns in that piece of paper, you simply write down who helped, what happened, what habit made it possible. Take a stock of where you're at the moment. This was the goal. This is where we're at when we do that. Who helped make that happen? What actually has happened? What happened? What did we do that actually made that happen? And then come back to that on a consistent and regular basis. I think that's a really good. Number 2 is what you'll call, I apologize, that exercise actually is not for the leader who's not sure who's winning. That's actually for one who is winning. It's a gratitude grid, so you can come back to the gratitude each and every time. I apologize, I misread my own notes. Number 2 is public credit giving, which we talked about before, really acknowledging visibly, publicly, aloud, with great candor and honesty and appreciation, everyone's role in the success that you've already had. On the flip side is the leader who doesn't realize that he or she is what we'll call a prosperity worksheet. We have to know, we have to force ourselves to do this if we are winning. So you might do this quarterly with your numbers and your metrics. That's fine, but it has to be habitualized and ritualized and forced into the calendar, into the structure, so we can compare then to what is now. And that we can do that on different levels. We can do that with respect to resources. We can do that with respect to capacity. We can do that with respect to opportunities. Do we have new opportunities now that we didn't have before? That might be a simple sign that we're actually winning. It's the prosperity audit. Number 2 is what I'll call the if we knew exercise. Ask yourself the following. If we knew we were secure, what would we do different? This is like a great question. Because a lot of the time you're working with somebody who lives in a scarcity mindset, they live in the space, but they're just not paying attention to it, and they're always focused on the negative, the losses, the failures, and so on. And you can ask this question. Let's assume for a moment that you are secure. What would you be doing different? And if they list out a bunch of things, great. And if they can't list out things that they would be doing differently, then maybe they have to recalibrate who they are, where they are, and what they're up to, and what they've actually accomplished to this point. It may be that they've already reached a certain pinnacle and they don't have to do anything differently. They're just not aware of what they're doing. Or the opposite is true. They have reached the pinnacle. They're fully aware of what they're doing. And now they have to say, no, at this point, we should be doing X or Y or Z. Okay, we have X or Y or Z. Let's go do X or Y. And so you have exercise, you have tools, you have the ability to appreciate that you're winning and that you need to go to the next level, and to work on the idea, the situation, the circumstance where you don't know that you're winning. And now you can come to realize that you're winning. What would you do differently? And if you can do them differently, go do them differently so you can actually see the actual wins. Let's finish it up this week. Leadership in prosperity. Moses doesn't just prepare the people to enter the land. He prepares them to stay faithful and to stay focused and to stay winning, to use the term of the day, even once they're there. Some other people will need to remember humility when the signs of winning are everywhere, and others will need to lift their eyes and realize they've already stepped into the very thing that they prayed for. They're already winning. They simply just don't realize it. We need to open their eyes. Both require a specific kind of intentional leadership, and both can be lost if you don't lead like you're winning. So here's our quote of the day. It comes from Pat Summitt, who was one of the great coaches in basketball history. She was the coach at the University of Tennessee. It's harder to stay on top than it is to make the climb. Continue to seek new goals. Winning seasons are dangerous because they whisper that you can relax now. And that's when leaders start to dip. That's when cultures start to soften. And so what Pat Summitt knew, she knew what Moses knew, which is winning isn't the time to coast. It's the time to protect what's been built, to keep pushing forward, and to make sure success doesn't slip away. If you're winning, lead like it matters, because it does. If you don't think you're winning, I'd suggest you look again. You might already be further ahead than you actually realize. That is Coaching the Bible for this week. Look forward to seeing you next week. Wishing you, as always, be blessed and incredibly great and beautiful and amazing weekend. Take care.